In the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic, San Francisco confronted its most consequential reckoning in a generation. A city straining under affordability pressures faced shuttered offices, darkened corridors, and thousands of vulnerable residents, many undocumented, locked out of federal relief. Into this crisis stepped civic innovators, economic strategists, journalists, and community builders determined to reimagine what San Francisco could become. When we first produced this episode during the COVID global pandemic, we discovered that the 5 top challenges facing San Francisco were a downtown core in freefall, once generating 72% of city GDP, a tax structure pushing businesses out of San Francisco, city governments forced to digitize overnight, immigrant communities excluded from pandemic stimulus, and the collapse of neighborhood corridors defining the city's cultural identity. Some of the solutions identified by our guests included office-to-housing conversion, civic tech innovation, inclusive financial services, and neighborhood reinvestment. Your navigator through these conversations and breakthroughs shaping the reinvention of San Francisco is co-host and associate producer Eric Estrada.
Our first voices are Judy Brown, co-founder of Civic Makers, Rebecca Woodbury, former director of digital services for the city of San Rafael, and Kelly Parmley, Assistant Director of Human Resources for the City of San Jose, as they share how their communities adapted and what they learned during the COVID-19 pandemic.
All right, Kelly, same question. How has COVID-19 impacted the operations of City of San Jose's programs? What have you and your team done to respond? How has it impacted your local economy, your small businesses, and nonprofits?
Yeah, so part of me wants to say exactly what Rebecca said, right? I mean, I think if you're in local government, those threads of the types of programs that we're talking about and the entire pivot of your workforce, not only just in terms of the people part of it, but the how you do your work is all relevant. And in the case of San Jose, a lot of it's a matter of scale. So I'll try to focus in on a couple of things, pivot a couple of things, but everything that Rebecca said, we did just at a larger scale. I think it's important in the city of San Jose to know a few things that I did not know coming from the East Coast. So 180 square miles, over 1 million people, about 40% of our population is foreign-born, and almost 60% speak a language other than English at home. So why do I say all of that? In order to serve with your community on a regular day, that poses a lot of challenges. And when you add on top of that a pandemic, in which I really want to emphasize, it wasn't just COVID, right? We hit then a financial crisis. Then we've known for a long time about issues of racial equity. And yet in terms of an emergency operations center, we're confronted face to face with those issues in our community, right directly at our city hall and on the streets. And on top of that, we had PG&E blackouts. We had early fire season. We had to deal with making sure that we were safe and secure for the election. So my reason for saying all of that is that the special circumstances then required a bunch of pivots, I would sort of call them, from a large city perspective. So one was pivoting our workforce. Pivoting our emergency operations center, they're set up for a very specific structure. I couldn't even tell you all the details, but there's a blue shift and a gold shift, and they're very specific roles. And we've trained on how to do those roles, and had to blow that up and rethink about what our EOC structure looked like, which was like setting up another small city. And then thirdly, we had to pivot our programs, in part because we were asked in particular by the county to do some things that we had not done before. So in addition to all the things that Rebecca talked about, we actually then needed to stand up food and necessities for the entire county, not just our own folks. And that was one of the biggest things that we did in the pandemic. So our programs got pivoted in multiple ways. So making sure folks understand that that's both an opportunity and a curse at times in terms of disaster service work. Then move 40% of your workforce, 40% of 5,600 full-time people overnight went to work remote. Some of them took their own personal devices and figured it out. We didn't have VPN access for many folks. There was a flurry of forms to do that. How do I communicate with my team? What's this thing called Zoom? I mean, when you think back about it, it's unbelievable to me that a place that has an inertia at times that is just frustrating to everybody suddenly had to rethink itself like overnight. So you got regular business as usual stuff that you need to do. And about 40% of our programs and services, those things that we don't care to talk about, like does your sewer work? Do you have clean water? Did your garbage get picked up? And did your recycling work? All those things kept going. People didn't miss a beat with that stuff. And then the others came online after it. So there's the business as usual. And then we stood up an emergency operations center and disaster service work that was basically a leadership side and a boots on the ground side, right? So it was assistance for homeless folks, food necessities, a series of other things. And my team got to make the phone call to folks who were on administrative leave to say, hey, guess what? You're a disaster service worker, and we need you to go spend some time now for the next umpteen weeks working in a homeless shelter for folks to make sure they have what they need and are able to be quarantined. So it's that kind of pivot that was just so huge. We stood up at its peak. It was around 650 employees in our emergency operations center. That's the equivalent of taking our public works department with no additional staff and also about 650 to 670 vacancies in the city, standing that thing up and working it for months and months and months.
So, Rebecca and Kelly, out of your pivots and all of the work you've done, what do you feel has been the biggest impact of a program? For example, Rebecca, your whole idea of free Wi-Fi, for example.
Sure. So I think that one of the most lasting and impactful elements of a lot of this work was the new partnerships and collaborations that were spurred. The Wi-Fi project, it really stemmed from someone in the community emailing me and saying, I heard there's a lot of kids that don't have the internet right now. And I have some experience with Wi-Fi networks. I think we could probably design and build one pretty cheap. That's where it started. And he then put in countless hours of work. We had another volunteer with a local IT company step up who had also built mesh Wi-Fi networks before. And so we had now hundreds of volunteer hours going into something. A county supervisor stepped up and led the philanthropic efforts to get all the money donated for the project. And it was a real all hands on deck. I had never worked that closely with the schools before. I had never worked that closely with the county IT department before, and also some boots on the ground nonprofits in the community. What's great about a project like that and the intensity and the immediacy of the need, right? It really pushed us into action to do things quickly. The relationship that were formed are going to have long-lasting impacts beyond this Wi-Fi project. So out of this, we also learned as we got out there that a lot of these families didn't have computers in their homes, didn't have access to laptops. So the devices were an issue. A lot of folks, their only access to the internet was through their smartphone and on their data plan. So we learned a lot, and this has spurred other efforts. We then partnered with the same partners on the Wi-Fi project and created a donation fund that we are now using the funds generated to just buy laptops for families so that they can own them. I think that there's going to be a lot more partnerships and collaborations from these efforts that are going to have these long-lasting impacts.
We are pleased to welcome Joaquin Torres, San Francisco assessor recorder, whose lead efforts to revitalize downtown San Francisco, prioritizing affordability, middle wage jobs, and economic recovery post-pandemic.
So we've been just talking about the importance of the multi-prong approach of economic workforce development. So what would you say over your decade of work have been some of the biggest impact of OEWD's programs? There's business creation component. So there's that, right? Impact there, and then impact in workforce, which you were just saying a second ago, that on the front of it, it looks like, pre-COVID, we were doing wonderful. Now, during and post-COVID, we're going to be doing horrible. And we'll get into that towards the end of your lessons learned, et cetera. But what do you feel have been the big impacts of the programs? And then I'd love to have you share perhaps your favorite story of the years that you've been working there.
Oh, wow. Well, there's internal impacts, and then, of course, there are the external impacts. And I think both are important because you want to leave an organization in a place where it is in a place of ongoing and consistent and possible expansion and development. So, I led and grew the organization from a budget of around $67 million to almost $92 million when I departed. Being able to be in a leadership position and have that office be seen as one that could be a leader in relief and recovery for communities, both large and small, for advancing our approach to racial equity in partnership with some of these city agencies, deepening work in communities. So again, they could see themselves reflected and respected in the work that we were doing together, making sure that that was focused on the communities of color that most needed our city resources, advancing housing development in 7 major sites across the city, approvals of, nearly 10,000 units of housing, with around 3,100 units of affordable housing included in those developments. The nonprofit sustainability initiative investing over $12 million to help nonprofits purchase their own space, build up their capacity, which supports, again, our overall vision for supporting those communities that are most in need. Creating the Invested Neighborhoods program and seeing it thrive and seeing it seen as an extraordinary resource across the city to foster the identity of San Francisco. And I think what was kind of cool too was, welcoming The Matrix filming last year and putting San Francisco on a different kind of map as well before the pandemic. Now, that was before the pandemic. And all the work that we did, especially around workforce development, creating youth programs through Opportunities for All, the mayor's initiative to make sure that every child could have access to, first, a summer job for the experience, that we're reaching individual youth to make sure that they could have an opportunity, because so many of us take that for granted, but it has to be intentional in many communities if you want to see those opportunities taken advantage of. And then during the pandemic, I think what's been extraordinary is because we had the ability to know community. We had the experience of working deeply within community, understanding the bureaucracy of the city, that we could be a leader in recovery efforts and be asked to lend our time and our resources and our services and our people to supporting that recovery effort. I'm extremely proud of the fact that we specifically supported communities of color in San Francisco during this time. Not always perfect. We're certainly not done. The city has a lot of work to do, like so many others across the country do. But I think we should feel very proud about what we started. And now it's about following through on our commitment and doing that work. I'm very proud that our office was looked to support the mayor's redistribution of public safety funds within the Office of Economic and Workforce Development to support the full portfolio that I talked about before.
We now turn to Chris Wright, Senior VP of Advanced SF, and Jeff Belisario, Executive Director of the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, as they discuss policies that restore vibrancy and economic recovery that attracts residents and businesses back to San Francisco.
I want to turn back to you, Chris, and just have you, if you will, kind of frame up for the audience the affordability crisis in San Francisco. It's obviously been building for a decade plus, and the COVID-19 pandemic's really had an impact. So share with the audience from your organization's point of view, its impact on San Francisco's economic core.
Sure. Just to frame it, in the beginning or before COVID, the city's economic core, and by the economic core, we're not just talking about the old financial district. We're looking at Union Square, the old financial district, Soma, and Yerba Buena, and maybe even closer to City Hall. That area accounted for 72% of the city's GDP. And that has significantly changed as a result of COVID and the use of remote work. Because of people being required to stay at home and relying heavily on remote work, many businesses learned that they can be just as productive as they were before. And on the other side, the employees learned or understood or realized that they appreciated the flexibility of working from home. And with that, as a result, we're now in a situation where between 25 and 30% of workers have returned to the downtown core. I think San Francisco right now has the highest office vacancy, maybe in the nation, highest certainly than it's ever been measured. About 25% of our office space is actually just outright vacant. And that number is probably going to climb. When you have fewer people coming downtown, that estimate has been, around the 300,000 mark. 300,000 people are no longer coming down to that downtown economic core. That has a tremendous impact on a lot of jobs and a lot of businesses, small businesses, restaurateurs, retailers. And, because of that, there's a whole drop in sales tax revenue that the city won't be collecting now because people are doing their shopping in other locations. So because of COVID and the use of remote work, we're looking at an economic core that looks significantly different than it did pre-COVID. And some of those affordability issues that we've had. Again, we've had a high cost of living in San Francisco for a long, long time. A high cost of leasing space for businesses, and obviously a high cost of living, high cost of housing for workers. And now that people can work wherever and businesses can operate wherever, that raises a whole question of what are we doing in San Francisco? So we wanted to take a closer look at, the hollowed out middle that we have in San Francisco and the economy. We want to take a closer look and use this going forward. What do we need to maintain that middle income employment? A lot of those small employers and also mid and large size. How can we make sure that the economy is whole and that the jobs there are as inclusive as possible? And that's the work that Jeff and the Mayor Council started to look at more closely.
Staying with the report, Jeff, the report actually teased out 10 trends driving post-COVID recovery. Can you share what those trends are?
So, when we look across the country, dense urban economies have really been impacted the most from COVID-19. Those high-cost coastal areas have seen loss of population. They've seen loss of jobs. And we've seen the center of gravity shift to what you might call more second-tier locations. Austin is at the top of that list. Salt Lake City, Denver, Nashville, Phoenix. All of these lower cost places have seen population growth and they've seen employment growth. Whereas here in San Francisco and New York is another example of this, we're still trying to catch up in terms of the amount of jobs that we've lost. Another piece of this is in our region, leisure and hospitality has been hurt more than in other regions of the country. So a lot of middle wage jobs are in that sector. We've really seen massive job loss there, still 25% job loss within that sector. That sector's still down about 30,000 jobs today from where we were pre-COVID. San Francisco overall is down about 40,000 jobs. So that's one of the key issues here is that there are fewer workers coming into downtown supporting those restaurants. There are fewer tourists coming into the city supporting hotels and supporting the entertainment and the art sector. So leisure and hospitality really fractured within San Francisco today. We've seen thousands of people drop out of the labor force altogether in San Francisco. Part of that is the population decline. When you look across the country, San Francisco, on a percentage basis, has had the largest population decline over 2 years of any city or county in the U.S. And then, all of those things are driven by remote work. It's really been a game changer for workers. It's untethered that home work location nexus we've had for so long. If you can work remotely 100% of the time, you can move out of the state, move out of the city altogether, right? You can work remotely just a day or 2 or 3 days per week. Maybe you're willing to make a longer commute into the city than you would have otherwise. It also changed the game for employers, where now previously you used to have that location in San Francisco or Silicon Valley to draw that talent. Now you're looking for remote workers, you're employing in the cloud, you're looking across the globe for your talent. It's not necessarily geographically focused. And then the other half of the equation is driven by costs, right? So San Francisco's never been the cheapest place to live or to do business. Our high housing costs, now with remote work and ability to move around, our high housing costs are potentially finally outweighing all the benefits of the city and the great aspects of the city. The new business taxes the city has imposed in the last couple of years is also, adding to that cost equation for many businesses. And then other geographies are just catching up to San Francisco. Everyone was looking at the San Francisco Silicon Valley playbook. How do we attract tech? How do we attract workers? The places like Austin, Miami, Denver, Boise, all of them have had these campaigns to draw in workers. And we're not competing against just one of them. We're competing more so against the cloud and all other geographies in San Francisco, but everyone's catching up to us. The center of gravity for tech is still very much here, but other places have taken, bigger pieces of the. I'll close just by saying the tech economy has driven a lot of San Francisco's growth over the past decade in particular. The tech economy does have trickle-down effects. If tech workers are supporting our service workers, tech companies need lawyers and they need architects and construction workers as they grow too, right? But now we're seeing in a remote work world where tech is going more remote and those workers have disappeared from San Francisco to a certain extent that a future San Francisco economy just can't be so reliant on tech. So there's been lots of change and upheaval. And I think what COVID-19 has done is really magnified the challenges of living and working in the city, but it's also created now an opportunity to re-envision what San Francisco can look like going forward.
Next on the program is Anna Tong of the San Francisco Standard, who brings on-the-ground stories of resilience and adaptation from the heart of the city, and Noah Arroyo of the San Francisco Chronicle, who uncovers the human impact of the pandemic, giving voice to the city's evolving story.
That leads directly into your reporting, Anna. Did a really great piece just on how taxes incentivize, if you will, businesses to not have folks sitting in offices. So share with the audience about your reporting.
So the way that business taxes are structured in San Francisco are that they're based on the percentage of a company's workers that are working from SF. So whether it's from your home or from an office in downtown. And so, as Noah was saying, when COVID hit, most people come into SF for work. They don't live in SF. So everyone started working from home in the East Bay, Napa, Palo Alto, whatever. And so a lot of companies saw their tax liability to the city drop dramatically. In one case, I was talking to a tax accountant. She was saying one of her clients, their tax bill to SF had dropped 88%. So these companies are seeing significant decreases in their tax liability. And they actually do technically owe money. If you conduct business in a city, many cities do have business taxes. So you would owe taxes in those jurisdictions. But the reality is SF's business tax structure is just so much more expensive for companies than essentially all other cities. But it's so much more expensive. And it's also so much more complex. So, for many cities, the business tax code is basically just one sheet of paper. And in SF, we have this whole portal. There are 30 people, that spend 70% of their time supporting business taxes. So it's just very, very, very complicated. Yeah, so that's the situation. It is incentivizing companies to, in some cases, just move entirely out of San Francisco. And I think we heard Stripe was saying that they were paying their employees just to actually get out of the Bay Area in general. And so a lot of these companies don't even want to have one employee who's even living in San Francisco.
And Noah, going back to you, your take on it, because this also ties back into your last two pieces with regards to kind of the re-envisioning of downtown, and yet another study that's been funded by the city to try to bring people back with events, space, et cetera. But share a little bit about vacant office space and retail, and then, kind of ramp into what your take is on the new reinvention plans.
Complex question. Well, you're not wrong. You walk around downtown and you see that very little is lively. Right? It's not true that there is no life going on. There's no commerce. We have seen improving figures for tourism, especially, and the hotel tax is one of the primary revenue sources for City Hall. And so that is very good for the city in a general sense. And obviously those tourists are going to spend on a lot of different things, not just their hotel stays. I live in the Tenderloin, so I'm a hop, skip, and jump down the street, or I should say up the street from the downtown area. And I see those tourists, and sometimes they spill in over into my neighborhood. And frankly, it's nice to see, just because it's nice to see the streets filled with more people. That said, Anna, you had mentioned the story that your publication came out with today. Speaking of which, kudos, good story. One of the numbers in that story was something I want to say it was back down as 30% of office workers are in their offices at this point, based on security card swipe information from Castle Systems, which has been the pretty consistent metric throughout the pandemic here, as well as in other major cities, about how is our revival going. And while other cities have trended upwards, including some of the Bay Area that are not that much better than San Francisco, but still have been trending upwards, San Francisco has fluctuated but hovered around 30 to 35%, at least as long as I've been looking at it. And that's been a while. So we see more people on the ground. I imagine that's going to be better for the downtown retail establishments on the ground floors. But at the end of the day, I think that the bigger, more ominous sign fiscally is that those offices are not filling back up. Now, there's a caveat to that, and that's that not all offices are created equal. If you're talking about what we'll say are AAA properties or trophy properties, the Salesforce Tower is an example of one of those. The very high-end office properties are, I'm told by brokers and real estate sources, they are much more populated during the day than the lower end Class C, the Class B. And so different subsets of office properties have different problems, we'll say, or different degrees of the same problem. And so all of this is the complexity that the city is going to need to grapple with, when they're figuring out what the financial future of this city is and how do we access that best? How do we get there? Now, you were asking me about how all of this dovetails with my recent reporting, right?
Correct.
Okay. What we have seen from some local groups on the ground, including downtown Asset Partnership, what seems to be the loudest nonprofit in the area. This is a business improvement district. In other words, they provide a number of services for the financial district in Jackson Square area in downtown. And what we have seen from them is a plan about how to revitalize downtown area by area. And they have a number of pilot areas. One of those that I looked at most closely was Lead Store. The idea is that you pump resources into these areas and you maybe tweak some of the regulations around what is allowable there. For instance, you would shut down an alleyway to car traffic so that it became more walkable. You would have pop-up businesses or pop-up restaurants in, let's say, a commercial spot that has been defunct for a number of months, which means that you need to coordinate with whoever owns that spot and see if they'd be cool with a business coming in and operating there for a week and having a rotating crew. You might have events. So the question is, where is the money going to come from for all of this? There are ideas about this, and the city is definitely putting forward a number of millions of dollars for this. But the idea after that is these various urban planning and design improvements to certain parts of downtown, hopefully, will start to draw more and more foot traffic to the area, more and more commerce. Now, will that be effective at increasing tourism to those areas? Probably. Will that be effective at increasing office attendance in those areas? That is a big question mark. Now, the reason why I don't say it won't is because I've talked to people who have jobs at companies that are in San Francisco as well as that are not, who are residents of San Francisco and working from home. And they have both told me, hey, if there was some event and they had free Wi-Fi outside and I could just go there, or some intersection that was closed to cars and I could hang out and there are people laughing and enjoying wine at some outdoor table, I'd go there and I'd work there all day. I asked one, how many days a week would you go there? She told me 3 to 4. I'd take my kids. So at that point, maybe what we don't have is a solution that so much brings more people back to their offices. Maybe we do, because maybe they're there during the day and they're at these events right after work or something. But at least I think what you have is increased presence, including by people who work off of a laptop, as long as Wi-Fi is supplied. And that is another big question.
We're at the halfway point of Reinventing San Francisco. Government, Downtown, and Civic Trust, part of Voices of the Community's COVID-19 impact on San Francisco's nonprofit series. In the first half, we heard from 8 thought leaders: Judy Brown of Civic Makers, Rebecca Woodbury of San Rafael, and Kelly Parmley of San Jose showed how local governments reinvented overnight, digitizing services, redeploying staff, and building civic capacity under pressure. Joaquin Torres, San Francisco's assessor recorder, reminded us that neighborhood corridors are the city's cultural lifeblood. Protecting them demands sustained investment. Chris Wright of Advanced SF and Jeff Belisario of the Bay Area Council Economic Institute put stark numbers on the crisis. 300,000 fewer daily workers, 25% office vacancy, highest in the nation, with rippling effects threatening the Bay Area. Noah Arroyo of the San Francisco Chronicle and Anna Tong of the San Francisco Standard showed a broken tax code incentivizing businesses to leave, with one company cutting its city bill 88% by going remote. Bold regional solutions are required: tax reform, downtown conversion, corridor reinvestment, and civic innovation. Support our work. Donate at voicesofthecommunity.com and visit Series Highlights Part 5 for guests, resources, and archives. We'll be right back. Coming up next are Sarah Wright and Kevin Trong, reporters for the San Francisco Standard, as they spotlight stories of resilience and explore how communities are navigating the pandemic's lasting impact.
Well, and staying with you, Sarah, why don't we segue into the findings from your reporting about the housing and transportation component?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple things that we found in our reporting. I think the first one that stood out to me is, unlike some other cities, which we'll talk about later, San Francisco, the city government is not pushing for these downtown office to housing conversions. The mayor's office is still trying to get businesses back. They're launching all of these campaigns to incentivize workers coming into the office. And when we talked to the planning department, what we found is that it's actually not going to be that difficult to make these conversions. So it's not the city's planning processes that are actually standing in the way. It feels a little bit more like a willpower problem, at least from the bureaucracy side. So Dan Sider, who is the chief from the city's planning department, said that approvals for an office to housing conversion could take a matter of months, and some of them wouldn't even require a hearing of planning commission. It's also a process that may be easier than normal housing building of this size, simply because the building already exists, right? And so a lot of the barriers that housing developers find in San Francisco is often community opposition to a large-scale building in a neighborhood.
And that can delay the process by months, even years. But because these buildings already exist, JM said it's possible that that step of the process would actually be a lot easier than normal. So that's not really the big barrier standing in the way. I think the biggest thing that we found with this, and I've dove deeper into since Kevin and I did this report, is the cost of making these conversions. So there haven't been any applications in downtown San Francisco for this type of housing conversion. And one of the reasons for that is because it's just so expensive to make these types of conversions. So inflation is adding up here in San Francisco when it comes to building costs, and rents are steady or even down here in the city. And so across all types of housing development, builders have told me that things just aren't penciling out for them these days in San Francisco. So they are looking elsewhere outside of the city, in the East Bay, on the peninsula, where the cost is lower and the process is a bit simpler. They're deciding that it's not worth it. The other thing that Kevin and I found is that just like the city's not necessarily betting on these offices staying empty forever, neither are developers. They have a pretty long range of planning when trying to figure out where and when to build. And it's still not certain, even after 2.5 years, whether offices will be full again at some point. And so developers just aren't right now ready to bet on a future of San Francisco that doesn't have tech offices bustling downtown. And then, the other thing is that offices aren't built with housing in mind. If you think about an apartment building, every unit would have to have its own kitchen. Every unit maybe would have laundry. Every unit would maybe have a dishwasher, lots of power fixtures. At least in this kind of like modern open office style building, we don't have all of that happening. So it would take a large scale gutting of a building to actually change that infrastructure, which again would be costly. What they did tell us at the planning department is there's a type of housing that this could work for, which here in San Francisco we call group housing, which is like this dorm style, which does have communal spaces like communal kitchens, communal laundry, and even sometimes communal restrooms, which would be a better fit for this type of conversions if developers were going to go ahead with this.
Well, and staying with the idea of cost again as well, for any of the listeners and folks, I call it the magical office conversion building, which is Ericsson's Emerald team converted the old AAA building on Van Ness and Fell Street into office space. And I think both of you talked to them as well. So, Sarah, do you want to share a little bit about that conversation?
Yeah, I'll let Kevin jump in as well. But the conversations that I've had with folks at Emerald and elsewhere is that the cost of building is only rising. And so that office conversion, it was complicated. I think that Oz told us that he's not even sure that it would be worth doing something like that today. It may have been the last of its kind at that price. And so that tracks exactly with what I've heard from other developers. Is experimental stuff isn't necessarily a good idea here in San Francisco, where it's already tremendously difficult to get projects through all of the permitting processes. And then by the time you do, hopefully prices haven't risen tremendously and you can still actually physically build the housing on site.
Thank you. And Kevin, would you like to add to that?
Yeah. And I actually had lunch with Oz a couple of weeks ago, and he said, forget conversion projects. No housing is basically getting built right now. If you look at sort of planning applications, they've really fallen off a cliff. And you think about the kind of macroeconomic situation when that development went through. San Francisco was on the rise. Capital markets were free. Interest rates were low. Much, much easier to get a project like that financed in addition to getting it built. I mean, construction costs basically have only increased since then and have, like Sarah said, inflation has definitely added fuel to that fire. And he said that was a very special building. It was a really nice, I think the term he used was skeleton, something that really worked because of a small, narrow floor plate, which is basically the way that the building is laid out, which allowed for access to open light, which is something that San Francisco's building requirements have for these types of residential projects. And obviously, nobody wants to live in a place that's all shut in without any windows or anything like that. But it was expensive, or more expensive than they initially first set out to do. But they were also in an environment where rents were high and still growing higher. So the economic sort of math made sense. A lot of times what gets built and what doesn't get built is pretty simple math. It's how much it takes to build and how much is going to come in. And if that equation doesn't balance, then that project probably won't get built.
Thank you.
Joining us now are co-founder and CEO Jose Quiñones, Program Director Elena Fairley, and Financial Education and Engagement Manager Efrain Segundo Orozco from Mission Asset Funds. This organization bridges the gap in financial literacy, offering education and tools to help immigrant communities build credit and secure their futures.
Well, and staying with that, if you could provide some context or, if you will, framing around the conversation that we're going to have today about the need for Mission Asset Fund's value proposition or services. And I think the piece that you talk about in your own mission is the financial invisibility of literally millions of people in the United States. So could you share with the audience a little bit about what you mean by financial invisibility, how that impacts folks, and then for anyone who's been spending any time with regards to finance and our underserved communities, there's an entire community of around 9 to 11 million unbanked people in the United States. So I think providing some context around that, and then we can turn to Elena and Efrain to tell us more about programs.
Well, we kind of got into this work not really even understanding what that term was. I don't think we had that term about being financially invisible or even being credit invisible. At the time, that wasn't a term. I think from our perspective, we basically looked at the mission, which was how do we help low-income immigrants improve the financial security when, in fact, half of the people that we were targeting to help didn't have a checking account or savings account. At that time, there was a study that came out that basically found that 44% of Mission households did not have a credit score, or their file was so thin that they couldn't generate a credit score. So to me, the question was, well, how do you help people build financial security when they don't have even access to the most basic of tools, like a checking account or credit score or credit history, for them to build their financial lives? How do you do that? At that moment in time, that conventional wisdom was that, well, all we needed to do is provide people with more financial literacy, get them in a classroom, teach them how to, balance a checkbook, and maybe they'll take note, and then that'll be it. I mean, that was convention. But at the time, we knew that that wasn't going to be enough. We knew that we needed to do more and provide something that was actually going to be real and tangible and practical to actually help improve their financial lives in tangible ways. And so for us, even before understanding the term credit invisibility, we knew that credit, however, was going to be really an important component of that. And so, in the asset building world, in the financial empowerment world, credit wasn't even the topic of conversation, frankly. But we were able to sort of push that idea through and now have made that an issue of concern. But at that moment, thinking about, well, how do you do that? How do you help people improve their financial lives when they don't have a basic access? Well, then you have to help them create that access, right? You can't just talk to them. You can't just lecture at them. Even if the lecture is in Spanish, it's not going to work, right? So you have to basically create it for them. So we were able to sort of use that as a starting point to innovate and how to make that happen.
Thank you. It's a really good table setting, if you will. So I'm going to turn to you, Elena, and ask you to share with the audience. And there's so many wonderful programs that MAF provides. And I don't want to get us into all of the granular detail, if you will, but you have a whole concept called community-centered approach. So let's start there and go into the programs. And then I want to turn to Efrain and talk about education and outreach and how you use technology.
Well, thank you, George, for highlighting our community-centered approach. And that's really where we like to start when we talk about our programs, because it is really the foundation for everything that we do. It informs our work from the smallest client interaction to our vision for change. So this community-centered approach can be summarized with just 4 words: engage, build, scale, and mobilize. And to break this down, what this means is that first and foremost, we engage deeply with communities to really understand clients' real lived experience and context. And I think that came through very clearly in Jose's retelling of our founding story. We trust that clients are the experts of their own lives, and we seek to listen to them. Next, we build. So we build on clients' innovative practices and strategies. We know that our clients are already actively participating in their financial lives. And so instead of thinking about, what needs to be fixed, what's broken, we want to really shine a spotlight on what's really good in people's lives.
lives and seek to elevate that and build on that. The third part of our approach is that we scale our programs using the best of finance and technology. So we're a very, very tech-forward organization. We see this as a really important lever in bringing our programs to more communities and also doing so in a really accessible and dignified way. And then the fourth part of our approach is mobilize. So we mobilize to use our deep learnings and insights to advocate and to organize for systemic change. And we do this because we want to create a fair financial marketplace that really works for everyone. So with this, context of how we do this work, how we engage communities, and bringing this down to earth a little bit and providing an example of what this actually looks like, I think a great example is our Lending Circles program. This is really our signature program. We've been offering Lending Circles since the very beginning. And for those of you who are not familiar, Lending Circles really at its core is a common global tradition of communities coming together and lending and borrowing money with one another. And so what we've done is we have formalized that process. We've created a program that is recognized, that is visible, and we've added credit reporting. So I think this goes back directly to Jose's vision for our founding. We knew that credit was so important, and we knew that community members were already engaging in all this bona fide financial activity. So how could we just simply elevate that and give people credit for what they were already doing in their lives? So fast forward many years, we've grown our Lending Circles program. It's become just a signature part of our work in San Francisco and beyond. We've also brought Lending Circles to more communities.
And to just in the Lending Circle component for folks, Lending Circles at its basic core is any of us in the Zoom room at this moment could participate in Lending Circles. It's people in the community basically showing up with whatever they have available to lend into the circle, and those pools of funds can be accessed by community members.
That's exactly right. It's all about communities showing up for one another, community members supporting one another. And it's really a beautiful thing. We host what we call formation events where the group actually comes together, sometimes in person. During the pandemic, we did it virtually. And one of the things that we hear really often is people say, I've done a Lending Circle before, I built my credit, now I'm here to support the next people. So that is absolutely part of what we do and how we do it.
Thank you. And Ephraim, your focus is on education and community outreach. And Jose talked a lot about basically meeting people where they're at, et cetera, and listening to the community. And I have a feeling you have some really great stories and was hoping you could share with us a story of someone who came in through the coaching program and has been able to utilize the MAPS tools to change the trajectory of their financial life.
I actually have a really good story about someone who participated in one of our programs. So every month at MAP, we choose a theme for the month, and all of our group events revolve around that theme. In the month of May, we had small business support because, as Elena and Jose mentioned, our base is a very entrepreneurial base and they have big aspirations. And man, they're just very innovative in the way that, they hustle, frankly. So I want to talk a little bit about one of our participants. His name is Jesus. So Jesus was working in a restaurant when the pandemic struck, and like many, he lost his job and he had to figure out exactly how he was going to maneuver and be able to provide for his family. He came to our community conversation and he shared his story because in the community conversation, it was a lot of people like him who are entrepreneurs, have their own small businesses, and how he came about doing so. So what did he do? He actually started selling fruit. He became a fruit vendor. He got himself a cart. He started loading up on fruit and doing whatever he could to put money on the table. And what I really appreciate about his story is, one, his gratitude that he had for math, because he was one of the recipients of our grants. And he's one of the participants in IFRP. So he receives the monthly funds and is really helping him. But he also learned about our microloans for business. And he was able to use those funds that he's getting from us every single month to start a microloan and to buy a bigger cart and to buy more material that he is able to grow his business with. So he realized that he could have gone back to the restaurant industry once things opened back up and relied on that source of income. But he also realized that he wanted to put matters in his own hands as much as possible. And I think that's one of the things that he learned throughout the pandemic is that unexpected things happen. And when unexpected things happen, you want to have as much control as possible. And I think that was something that was lacking for many of us, right? When the pandemic struck, because of so much uncertainty, so much fear, and so much just unknowing about what's going to happen, that a lot of us felt like we lost our sense of control. And that was definitely the case with Jesus. And I guess the last little thing I want to mention as far as stories is not about a specific person. It's about all the people that attend our chatlas, because our chatlas, sometimes we don't get to see their faces. It's on Facebook Live or it's on Zoom. They have their cameras off. But what I really, really love, and shout out to the Mobilize and Engagement team. They're the ones who carry this work. I definitely don't do it by myself. It's a team of 9 of us who carry out these events and work really hard to make sure we try to deliver them as best as possible. But we really enjoy the questions, because the questions that people ask us during these live events give us an insight as to, hey, what do we need to focus on? We want to have our ear to the ground as much as possible and say, hey, these are the interests that people have now. These are the things that are impacting people now. And we try to be as fluid as possible in our creation of content to be able to deliver it in a timely fashion in a way that's going to be impactful to people.
Lastly, we feature the voice of Madison Alvarado, a San Francisco Public Press reporter who ensures transparency and accountability, giving voice to the city's underserved and marginalized communities. We also feature the voice of Michelle Moritz from the League of Women Voters as she drives civic engagement, inspiring San Franciscans to participate in building a fairer, more inclusive city.
All right, so moving on to Proposition C.
So Proposition C would create oversight commission to oversee one of San Francisco's largest departments, and that is the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. The Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, or HSH, is the 8th largest city department, and in fiscal year 2022 through 2023, it has a budget of $672 million. So that makes it right now the largest city agency without an oversight committee. And so Proposition C would create an oversight commission to have binding authority over projects and funding for the department. And that would make it the first oversight committee in the Bay Area that is tackling projects sort of around homelessness. A lot of other cities have commissions and committees that advise their homelessness departments, but these public bodies aren't able to hold city agencies or service providers accountable. And here in San Francisco, a lot of people know that a large portion of homeless services come from third-party providers like nonprofits. And in the last few months, there have been several big investigations. I know I'm thinking of the San Francisco Chronicle investigating conditions in single-room occupancy hotels. Also here at the Public Press, one of our reporters was looking into really long wait lists, but there were lots of vacancies in the different shelters and SROs. And so this measure is kind of designed to create a lot more oversight and transparency around that department for an issue that San Franciscans and Californians widely list as a top concern for them, which is homelessness. The Board of Supervisors unanimously voted to put this measure on the ballot. So clearly it has a lot of support. If this commission is created, it will have 7 members, and initial appointments will be made in March of 2023. 4 of those appointees will be appointed by the mayor, and the other 3 will be appointed by the Board of Supervisors. And basically, if the Oversight Commission is created, they will formulate, evaluate, and set homeless policies, serve as a public forum to raise accountability issues and advocate for fair policies, conduct investigations into governmental operations that are within its jurisdiction, and a few other key roles. So yeah, if you are interested in looking into that more, our reporter kind of does a full breakdown of a lot of the different aspects that Oversight Commission will do, but that's kind of the bare bones of what we'd be looking at if this measure passes.
All right. Thank you. And now moving on to the dueling affordable housing coming from the mayor or the Board of Supervisors.
Yes. Yeah. So I think this is a topic that we've been hearing a lot about. At least I've been seeing a lot because once again, homelessness, affordable housing, all of these issues are really up front and center in voters' minds, I think. These two are coming at a pretty critical time for San Francisco. 3 months ago, the California Department of Housing and Community Development launched an investigation into San Francisco's housing policies to sort of figure out why the permitting process takes so long here, especially considering we have a massive affordable housing shortage. And so these two measures are both focused on streamlining that process and sort of who gets veto power and within the city looking at the permitting process for various affordable housing projects. There are a few key differences. So I'm going to sort of outline some of those two. But as George said, it really makes sense to kind of talk about the two of them together because they're both targeting the same thing, but have sort of different ways of going about it. So starting with Proposition D, this was brought forward by Mayor London Breed, and she tried to get it passed by the Board of Supervisors, but ultimately was not successful in that. So she turned with a group of other groups like Habitat for Humanity, Greater SF, SF YIMBY, which we know stands for Yes in My Backyard, and a few other groups to get the 10%, I believe, required 10% of registered voters' signatures to have this appear on the ballot. And basically what her plan will do is it will streamline approval for three types of affordable housing development. And that is 100% affordable housing development, affordable housing that's designed for teachers, so folks who are employed with City College of San Francisco and the San Francisco Unified School District. And then a third category, which is mixed income buildings. And this is where you kind of start to see some of the differences in the two proposals. So for Mayor London Breed, the plan that she's backing, the buildings that would qualify are mixed use buildings with 15% more affordable housing than currently mandated by the city. So the city currently mandates that 22% of a mixed income building is affordable. And so this plan being pushed by Mayor London Breed, Proposition D, would require an extra 15% on top of the 22% mandated by the city. In contrast, the other plan, Proposition E, which was pushed by several members of the Board of Supervisors, has a flat requirement of 30% for mixed income housing developments to be streamlined through this approval process. So that's one key difference between the two. Another important aspect that the backers of Proposition D are pushing is that going through the approval process, there are certain housing developments are subject to review under the California Environmental Quality Act. And that act has been cited by supervisors in several controversial rejections of housing developments. And under the Proposition D, these projects that I just described, those three categories, they would not be subject to review under CEQA. And so supporters say that this is really key to making sure that there's no unnecessary stops or rejections of the development of certain proposed sites. However, Proposition E does not make a complete exemption. So there are some projects under Proposition E that may be subject to review under the California Environmental Quality Act. And so that is another key difference between the two. And people who are in favor of eliminating CEQA oversight say that's really important to making sure that none of these projects are vetoed. And so the opponents of Proposition E are saying, you know, by not including that exemption, that's going to affect how many sites get built. So the critics of Prop D say that it won't actually generate affordable housing, and they're saying it's a developer giveaway. And then the critics of Prop E are saying they're missing this really important inclusion because there's no CEQA, because CEQA oversight is still allowed. And so they're worried that projects will be stopped through that. And the opponents of Proposition E are also saying the affordability requirements are so high that the projects will not pencil out and it won't produce any new housing. So that's an overview trying to get to some of the nuances and differences between these two. But yeah, they both kind of have the same goal, but different strategies as to how to fix that, and different groups on either side supporting, you know, which measure they think should pass. And both sides are very passionate about which one is more effective or which one, will result in higher affordability and less gentrification and all of these other factors.
Yeah, very good. And so now moving on to a proposition that I'm sure no one hates, and that's libraries.
Yes. So Proposition F is a plan to extend the Library Preservation Fund for another 25 years. So that would extend the fund through June 2048. And right now the fund draws 2.5 cents out of every $100 from existing property taxes. And so this rate, setting aside this rate, would basically be continued if Prop F passes. And so the fund is designed to provide library services and materials and help operate library facilities. So yeah, this basically would just extend that fund for another 25 years. Supporters note that there is no increase in cost as this is part of a set aside, and that libraries are a really key public resource. As far as I'm aware, there are no arguments against this measure, and the city controller estimates that it will have very minimal costs. So yeah, that's a brief overview of Proposition F.
Michelle, any thoughts on libraries?
I did come across a couple of opponents' arguments. One, that the current voter-approved library preservation fund renewal period of 15 years is satisfactory and provides more flexibility in terms of not locking it in for 25 years. And another opponent one that I saw was a set-aside does not allow flexibility for other city needs, driving up property taxes.
And that brings us to the close of Reinventing San Francisco, Government, Downtown, and Civic Trust, the fifth installment of our special COVID-19 Impact Highlights series here on Voices of the Community. In the second half, we heard from 7 extraordinary voices. Sarah Wright and Kevin Trong of the San Francisco Standard brought the human and policy story of downtown's transformation, documenting what is being lost and what communities are still actively fighting to reimagine. Jose Quiñones, Elena Fairley, and Efrain Segundo Orozco of Mission Asset Funds exposed one of the pandemic's cruelest truths. Millions of undocumented and low-income residents were excluded from every round of federal stimulus through policy, not oversight. Their response? Lending circles, microloans, immigration loans, and direct cash assistance showed what community-centered finance can do when trust replaces gatekeeping. Madison Alvarado of the San Francisco Public Press connected pandemic recovery to the 2022 ballot, helping communities understand measures shaping housing, public health, and public safety. And Michelle Moritz of the League of Women Voters brought the nonpartisan explanation of the 2022 state propositions. Our defining themes this episode were financial invisibility as a systemic crisis, community trust as the engine of real innovation, independent journalism as civic infrastructure, and voting as an essential act of recovery. Thank you to every guest and to you, our listeners, for caring about this city, its people, and neighbors. Donate at voicesofthecommunity.com. Visit Series Highlights Part 5 for guest profiles and the full episode archive. Now back to George for our wrap-up.
Before we sign off, a sincere thank you for spending time with us today. This episode is part of our special highlight shows drawn from our COVID-19 special series, a body of work that began when Bayback Media invited us, under Paula Argoni's leadership, to co-produce SF Nonprofit Spotlight. Those 10 television episodes we helped produce led us to chronicle the wider ecosystem of social, government, and economic support. We introduced you to nonprofits, small businesses, libraries, artists, and public agencies adapting in real time to the first global pandemic in several generations. From April 2020 through January 2023, we produced 105 episodes documenting what it looked like to serve, survive, and innovate under extraordinary pressure, and what our common community ecosystem demands from all of us today and into the future. Here's how you can keep the momentum going. Start by subscribing to the Voices of the Community podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen, so new episodes find you automatically. Next, please rate the show and share it with friends or colleagues. Your reviews and reposts markedly increase our reach, putting these voices in more ears that can act. Then subscribe to our YouTube channel for full video episodes and archives. Search YouTube for Gio Coster and click subscribe. If this storytelling serves you, please consider making a tax-deductible donation at voicesofthecommunity.com. Just click the donate button, and your contribution directly supports field reporting, editing, mixing, transcription, and distribution. It keeps community media independent and accessible. We also want to hear from you. Send feedback on today's show, propose topics, or suggest guests by emailing George at georgecoster.com. Your notes shape our editorial calendar and introduce us to new problem solvers. We could not make these shows possible without our wonderful team. Associate producer Eric Estrada for co-hosting plus his audio and video wizardry, and designer Casey Nance of Citron Studios for her visual brilliance. Thanks also to our broadcast partners, KSFP LP FM 102.5 FM in San Francisco and KPCA LP FM 103.3 FM in Petaluma, for highlighting these stories. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and join us for our next highlight episode in the COVID-19 series, featuring voices addressing homelessness and housing services for our unhoused neighbors. Until then, take care and remember, your voice matters.